Mildred, a name gasped in the night. The one last word of a dying man. But one word that tells 1,000 stories of a woman who left her mark on every man she met.
Mildred had more to offer a man in a glance than most women give in a lifetime.
Mildred knew what she wanted. It wasn't too particular how she got it.
Mildred? Loving her was like shaking hands with the devil. I wonder why you brought me here tonight. I mean, all of a sudden, boom, husband gone, soft lights, quiet room, opportunity.
You make me feel, oh, I don't know, warm.
And wanted.
How long has this been going on?
Monty's going to divorce you and marry me. And there's nothing you can do about it. You think because you've made a little money, you can get yourself a new hairdo and some expensive clothes and turn yourself into a lady. But you can't. Because you'll never be anything but a common...
Welcome back to Nightly Noir, where even children can become morally gray. Tonight we have a great film to talk about, Michael Curtis's Mildred Pierce from 1945. The kind of woman most men want, but should never have. How far would you go for a love? Would you grind hours at a job you had to settle for? Would you marry someone you didn't truly love? Would you kill someone for the sake of another? Those are some of the things this movie explores as we follow Mildred Pierce navigate her life as a wife of a loveless marriage, a businesswoman, and ultimately, a single mother. The movie starts out with a bang. Literally. We see a man fall to the floor after a series of gunshots. Who is he? What's his deal? Why did he get shot? I don't know. The audience doesn't know. All we know is there's a dead guy, and he probably knows Mildred. We then cut to the titular character Mildred, played by Joan Crawford, walking along the docks. She appears upset, and a nearby cop seems to catch on to that fact. Before Mildred can do anything too severe, he walks up and talks to her about not doing what he thinks she wants to do, which is jump into the ocean and kill herself. He tells her it isn't fair to him because he would have to jump in after her and save her, and he doesn't want to get wet. Man, there's nothing like preventing someone's suicide by telling them how it inconveniences you. She obeys the cop and walks back to the boardwalk, where we find a series of buildings and are introduced to one of the best characters in the film, Wally Fay, played by Jack Carson. Right away we can tell he's a fast talker with an eye for Mildred. Mildred unexpectedly invites Wally over to her beach house for a better drink than what's offered at the current joint. At least we know our girl has good taste in the silly drinks. When they get there, Mildred starts being sort of flirtatious, but stiff. Playing hard to get, maybe? Wally thinks he has a chance at some action, but before things can progress, he gets bamboozled by being locked in the house, and we see Mildred get the heck out of Dodge. Wally soon discovers the dead guy we saw at the beginning of the film, and immediately forces his way out of the house. Did Mildred know about the stiff? Was she trying to frame Wally for murder? Lots of questions right away here. The cops were already tipped off about a disturbance near the house, and soon we see our dear Wally getting booked to the police station.
I'm so smart it's a disease.
He truly had the disease of being smart. Luckily, this won't be the last we see of him. We then cut back to see Mildred return home, and we're introduced to Mildred's daughter, Veda, played by Anne Blythe. She complains that there are police at their home, and won't tell her what's going on. Mildred dismisses her daughter to go to bed, and the police tell her they need her to come by the station. Once they're alone, the police tell her that her husband has been murdered. So that's who that was. She's taken to the station, and we see other characters that Mildred knows, including her ex-husband, Bert Pierce, played by Bruce Bennett. We also meet Ida Corwin, played by Eve Arden. We're not quite sure what the nature of their relationship is, but we'll find out soon enough. After waiting what seems like an unnecessary amount of time, Mildred finally gets to meet with the head officer on the case of her husband's murder. What's odd, though, is she is soon told that the case has already been solved, and they know who the culprit is. They reveal that her ex-husband, Bert, is the one they believe committed the murder. Not that he confessed or anything, just that all the clues they have point to him as the murderer. Mildred refuses to accept that and begins explaining her story to try and clear Bert's name. And now, we're at the story proper, complete with flashback and all. This is where the meat of the movie is, and we get all the juicy details of how Mildred and the rest of the cast have ended up where they are currently. The story is full of drama, romance, twists and turns. We see Mildred develop across the film. She starts out as a naive young housewife with 2 girls she'd do anything with. By the end of the film, she's a hardened woman who has been heavily impacted by the major events of her life. Her 2 girls, Veda and Kay, seem like your typical sisters. Kay is the youngest and is very much a tomboy. She's played by Joanne Marlowe and does an excellent job as a child actress. Veda is her older sister and appears to be much more prim and proper. Soon we get a glimpse of their true natures near the end of the first flashback scene, where Veda is trying on a new dress her mother recently bought her. Kay thinks it looks good, but Veda is dissatisfied with it, complaining about the way it smells and looks. Keep this in mind as we go forward. Mildred eventually has to get a job since she decided to separate from Bert. She struggled to get a job for a while. Man, sounds like the job market these days. She eventually gets a lucky break at a cafe and meets Ida, the woman from before at the police station. Ida lets Mildred work, and soon she's the best waitress there. Strangely, she never tells Veda where she works until one day she finds out that Veda figured it out. They argue about Veda not liking the idea that her mother is a waitress, and then Mildred states that she was only working there so she could learn how to run a restaurant. This is telling, because before this moment, it didn't seem like Mildred ever had the intention of opening her own restaurant. It almost seems like she came up with this excuse on the spot to appease Veda. This is a trend we'll see throughout the film. Soon we see Mildred developing a plan to open her own place, and she goes to enlist the help of everyone's favorite realtor and businessman, Wally. It doesn't take too much convincing from Mildred to get Wally on board with negotiating for her to buy a property she really has no money to get outright. They go to meet the owner of the property she had her eyes on, and wouldn't you know it, the owner is the guy we saw get bumped off at the beginning of the film. Things are starting to get a bit more interesting. After some decent negotiations, more like Mildred pleading for the chance to pay the guy back when she made some money from the restaurant, the owner, Monty Berrigan, played by Zachary Scott, agreed to sell her the property. During her renovations to turn the house into a proper restaurant, Monty comes by and begins flirting with Mildred. At first, she tries to resist his charms, but it has been some time since she had allowed herself to enjoy the fun of male attention out. She relents, and they go swimming. Before too long, she's caught up in his embrace, and so begins a relationship that we'll soon see should probably have never started in the first place. Mildred gets back from her little rendezvous, and for some reason her ex-husband is at her place. He says he's been looking for her because her youngest daughter Kay got sick while he took her and Veda on a trip. Turns out, Kay caught pneumonia while she was on vacation with her family. This disease was a particularly deadly illness during this time period, especially in children. Mildred gets to her shortly before she passes away from the illness. With a weak, "Mommy," she's gone. This marks a shift in the movie. Mildred begins focusing all of her attention into her restaurant and Veda. Using the profits from her restaurant, she opens several more and begins raising her and Veda's standard of living. Veda seems happy and content at this point, but things aren't all as they seem. Mildred expresses discontent about how Veda's appetite for expensive things is beginning to wear on her. Not only that, but Bonnie has been taking Veda out on outings, showing her the type of life she always wanted. I think it's important to point out that Monty Berrigan does not have a job, nor has he ever had a job. He has been living off of his family's money and inheritance, which has been quickly dwindling due to his penchant for living frivolously. What's worse is that he has been taking money from Mildred since they have been together for a while at this point. Eventually, Mildred gets tired of him spoiling her daughter as she is already rotten enough as it is. They break up, but before we can fully come to grips with that, it turns out Veda has been busier than we thought. Mildred finds out that Veda and Ted Forrester, a young man with a wealthy family, similar to Monty, got married without telling anyone. Ted's mother, however, isn't too thrilled about this, and has the 2 young adults get a divorce. Veda agrees to the divorce, but states that she was pregnant, and basically blackmails the Forresters into giving her $10,000 as compensation. Now here comes the crazy part. This is what shows just how far Veda has fallen from the young prissy girl we knew from before, and makes you question what Mildred has been doing for her daughter this entire time. Veda reveals to Mildred that she lied about being pregnant, and manipulated the young man into the situation to fleece him for his family's money. Mildred is floored by this information naturally, and becomes upset, as I would think any sane person would. When she asks Veda why she wanted that money since, as it stands, Mildred has been providing more than enough nice things for her, Veda tells her she hates the fact that the only reason she is rich is because Mildred works at a restaurant.
With this money, I can get away from you.
Veda.
From you and your chickens and your pies and your kitchens and everything that smells of grease.
Man, If I spoke that way to my mother, I wouldn't be here to talk to you tonight about this movie. Mildred understandably kicks Vida out of the house, and then takes an impromptu vacation in Mexico. She gets back home, still bothered by the fact that she kicked her only living daughter out of the house, and confides in Ida this sentiment. This is also where we get Ida's great insights into her views of Mexico.
You know, I like Mexico. It's so Mexican. Thanks.
Amazing analysis. Then we get to see Bert show back up and ask Mildred out for dinner. Now what's going on here? He takes her to this restaurant that features live entertainment, and before they get their meal, who should show up on stage than Vida herself. Mildred is floored by the revelation and makes her way backstage after her daughter's performance. They have a stiff-lipped conversation, and Mildred even asks Vida what it would take to get her to come back home. Vida, self-reflective for once, states that going home would probably be a bad idea because she would just go back to her old ways. Mildred leaves and eventually comes to the conclusion that she needs to climb to a status beyond her entrepreneurship as a franchised restaurant owner. She enlists the help of now broke Monty Berrigan to get married and gain that upper status. Monty only agrees to the deal when Mildred agrees to give him a percentage of her company. It kind of makes sense given the fact that he's essentially broke at this point, but this is actually a key point that becomes much more important later on. They get married, and Vida comes home shortly thereafter. Things are going okay, but not great. It soon becomes clear that Mildred can't keep up with Vida's desire for a lavish lifestyle, along with Monty's irresponsible spending habits. The situation is very similar to the one we saw her in right before Mildred kicked Vida out. Eventually, Mildred is notified that Monty has essentially bankrupted her and is now forced to sell her portion of the restaurant chain, while Monty would get to keep his share. Remember what I said about the importance of him taking an interest in her business? Distraught and upset over this, Mildred goes and grabs a gun that we know from earlier in the film was originally owned by her ex-husband, Bert. She heads to the beach house, the same one from the beginning of the film, where she knows Monty is. What's she gonna do when she gets there? The answer may surprise you. At this point, I'm not going to spoil you on the ending of Mildred Pierce's story, but you may be able to piece it together yourself with the bits of story throughout the film. Or you could watch the film in its entirety, which I strongly recommend if you can. Unfortunately, the movie isn't on any streaming platform without paying to rent or buy it digitally. Either way, it's definitely worth a watch. What's interesting to note is how the film deviates from its original novel that it's based on. James M. Cain wrote Mildred Pierce in 1941, and though he was well known as a hard-boiled crime writer, Mildred Pierce was much more of a psychological thriller. In fact, there wasn't even a murder in the novel. That was added as part of the film adaptation. The original novel spans 9 years, as opposed to the film's 4. This was more than likely necessary for the film, due to not being able to easily account for aging over the course of 9 years versus 4. In the film, Mildred's restaurants are way more fantastical and popular than in the novel. Mildred opens an entire chain of restaurants in the movie, whereas she only owns 3 in the novel. Even though Vida is most definitely the main antagonist of the film, she is somehow even worse in the novel in some ways. Being a novel, the writer took more time delving in and exploring more of Vida's negative traits and motivations for why she acted in certain ways. She manipulates others, even more so than in the movie, as well as engaging in very terrible acts, such as sleeping with Monty while Mildred was still with him. She was characterized much more as a femme fatale of sorts, which is a topic I've covered right here on the channel. However, due to censorship constraints, many of Vida's more villainous acts had to be cut for filming purposes. A detail that wasn't fully shown in the film, but was more prominent in the novel, was Mildred's obsession with Vida and trying to control her in many aspects of her life. It is in these details that make Vida a more compelling character in the novel than in the film. There were multiple references to the Great Depression and the Prohibition era in the novel that are absent from the film. Overall, the film's plot is simplified, and many characters were either cut from the film or retrofitted to other characters. Mildred had a best friend in the novel, Lucy Gessler, who is not in the film, but many of her traits got transferred to Ida's character. Many of the changes that were made in the film adaptation were somewhat necessary given the limitations a film in that time period had. Not only that, but there were also censorship codes that dictated that people who do evil things must pay for their crimes, which is part of how the murder plot got introduced in the film adaptation. This is surprisingly absent in the original novel. The presentation of Mildred Pierce is very cinematic, and of course, film noir. The use of shadows is a particularly fun aspect of the cinematography. The settings are varied and well designed. We see small suburban homes, an oceanside beach house, several bars, even a luxurious mansion. There are shots of Mildred's franchised restaurants with large signs with fancy lighting too. Everything in the movie looks and feels more or less authentic to the time period. The characters are all well developed and fun. Even Vida with her terrible antics is a fun foil to Mildred's naivety and efforts to make life better for them. My favorite character, Wally, is the best side character. He gets pulled into the story mainly just because he associates himself so much with Mildred. Sadly, he never gets to be with her, but he doesn't do too bad for himself business-wise. I love the themes of this film. Exploring the limits one may go through to keep a child, or just a loved one, satisfied is a great story to look into, especially when you have characters as morally complex as Mildred, Monty, and Vita to some extent. You really end up empathizing with Mildred by the end of the movie. Every decision she made was in an effort to make her daughter's life better than the life she had, which I believe is the goal of many parents. Despite these efforts, Mildred ends up coddling Vita, alienating her in a way, and not showing her the lesson she really needs as she grows up. Vita gets exposed to a lifestyle far and away from the one she grew up in initially. Mildred had to work for everything she had, whereas Monty got to live off the legacy of his family. I'm sure this skewed Vita's worldview to the point she acts out, and it explains where she gains this contempt for her mother. Even Bert, Mildred's ex-husband, has some complexity. He starts the movie as an angry, unfaithful husband, but he makes comments that foreshadow future events. He sees Vita as she truly is, a selfish, greedy person who manipulates people without hesitation. He states that Kay, the younger daughter, is the better of the two of them. Granted, Kay is still more of a child and innocent by this point, and never gets the opportunity to gain any other moral complexity thanks to pneumonia. Bert shows that even though Mildred and him didn't see eye to eye on a lot of things, including how to raise their children, we see him still support Mildred in various ways, including trying to take the blame for Monty's murder. He may not have been a good husband, but he showed that he was a pretty good father and a supportive partner outside of marriage. Every element of this film combines to make a fantastic thriller with plenty of noir flair. The cinematography, music, and characters all culminate into something quite special. If you made it this far into the video, thanks for watching. If you've had the privilege to see this film before, what are your thoughts on it? Let me know in the comments. This has been Nightly Noir, and have a good night.